Have you ever wondered how Bill Gates gets such positive media coverage? It's because he owns it, or at least funds large parts of it. Bill, give us some money. We'll be a bit more positive on this channel. I'm only mucking around. Hello there, you 4.5 million raw wonders. Let us become refined together right now. If you're in the UK next year, between January and May, I'm performing all over the place. Have a look at the link in the description. In the meantime, let's have a look at the relationship between Bill Gates and the media. Bill Gates apparently gives a whole bunch of money to all sorts of different media outlets. Why would that be necessary? Alex McLeod, writing in The Grey Zone, said, "A look at the database of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation reveals how the oligarch influencing the global pandemic response has bankrolled hundreds of media outlets to the tune of at least $319 million. I am not a conspiracy theory person. I'll tell you why, because I like to see proof and evidence of things. That's what I'm interested in. Speculative stuff is interesting and we all get off on it. But I just like to look at things that there's evidence for, and then you can speculate how that might affect outcomes. Of course you can. But on this channel, we just read things that are demonstrable, like this. While other billionaires' media empires are relatively well known, the extent to which Bill Gates' cash underwrites the modern media landscape is not. After sorting through over 30,000 individual grants, Mint Press can reveal that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, BMGF, has made over $300 million worth of donations to fund media projects. Bloody hell, they could buy this one for about 500 quid. Recipients of this cash include many of America's most important news outlets, including, you'll be astonished to learn, CNN, NBC, NPR, PBS, and The Atlantic. Gates also sponsors a myriad of influential foreign organisations. The money is generally directed towards issues close to the Gates' hearts. Do your own joke. For example, the Texas Tribune received millions to increase public awareness engagement of education reform issues in Texas. Given that Bill is one of the charter school's most fervent supporters, a cynic might interpret this as planting pro-corporate charter school propaganda into the media disguised as objective news reporting. Generally speaking, if investments are being made, if grants and money is being handed over, there is an expectation. That's how commerce and trade operate. Most of the philanthropy and donations have some sort of explicit or implicit agenda embedded in them. The Gates Foundation has also given nearly $63 million to charities closely aligned with big media outlets, including nearly $53 million to BBC Media Action and $1 million to the New York Times Neediest Causes Fund. While not specifically funding journalism, donations to the philanthropic arm of a media player should still be noted. Gates continues to underwrite a wide network of investigative journalism centres as well, totalling just over $38 million. The foundation also puts up money to directly train journalists all over the world in the form of scholarships, courses and workshops. Today, it's possible for an individual to train as a reporter thanks to the Gates Foundation grant, find work at a Gates-funded outlet and to belong to a press association funded by Gates. Who funded your education? That was Bill Gates. And where do you work for now? The Bill Gates-funded CNN network. And what do you think about Bill Gates? I love you, Daddy! This is especially true of journalists working in the fields of health, education and global development, the ones Gates himself is most active in and where scrutiny of the billionaire's actions and motives are most necessary. Obviously, that is not evidence of any wrongdoing or malpractice. In fact, perhaps in a less cynical world, you'd say, well, it's just kind to train journalists, plucky journalists from the street, learning their journalism in the ghettos there, getting them a foot up on the ladder of the corporate media. But obviously, public opinion and PR are vital if you have an agenda. And if, as I have heard, Bill Gates also funds WHO, in fact, I think is the largest donor, then having positive media reporting is incredibly advantageous. That's what the profession of PR is. That's what lobbying is about, influencing people's opinion. Of course, you want to create awareness. There's no doubt about that. But to invest this much money in control or at least influence of the media feels like it would be unlikely to have no agenda attached to it. And while the Gates Foundation fosters an air of openness about itself, there is actually precious little public information about what happens to the money from each grant. A case in point is the BMGF's partnership with Viacom CBS. Media reports at the time noted that the Gates Foundation was paying the entertainment giant to insert information into its programming and that Gates had intervened to change storylines in popular shows like ER and Law and Order SVU. Oh my God, what's wrong with the patient? I don't know, but it's certainly nothing to do with Bill Gates, who I think's a great guy. You're under arrest. What for? Well, certainly not the malpractices of Microsoft, who are a fantastic company. Why are you talking about Microsoft? I just like Microsoft. Why? I don't know, that little paperclip. I love that guy. He's very helpful. However, when checking BMFG's grants database, Viacom and CBS are nowhere to be found. The likely grant in question, totaling over $6 million, merely describing the project as a public engagement campaign aimed at improving high school graduation rates. For a tax-privileged charity that so very often trumpets the importance of transparency, it's remarkable how intensely secretive the Gates Foundation is about its financial flows. Tim Schwab, one of the few investigative journalists who has scrutinised the tech billionaire, told Mint Press. Also not included are grants aimed at producing articles for academic journals. While these articles are not meant for mass consumption, they regularly form the basis for stories in the mainstream press and help shape narratives around key issues. The Gates Foundation has given far and wide to academic sources, with at least $13.6 million going towards creating content for the prestigious medical journal, The Lancet. Bloody hell. I mean, you don't even like to speculate as to what kind of influence might be purchased there. But you can see this is a very far-reaching web of influence that's being created, from journalist education to the media outlets to sort of bizarre influence in episodes of ER, which I'm going to watch back again and look for particular storylines that seem advantageous to Bill Gates. We finally cracked the case. Who was it? An informant down at the docks? No, it was this little paperclip and this handy little Windows 98. Hey, happy to be on the team, buddy. Get him out of here. No, I mean, I like you. And of course, even money given to universities for pure research projects eventually end up in academic journals and ultimately downstream in mass media. You see that yourself for your own consumption of media. A report out in such and such a thing. Well, if that report is in some way funded by a particular foundation, and that foundation has interests in other areas, then it's pretty easy to join the dots. Academics are under heavy pressure to print their results in prestigious journals. Publish or perish is the mantra in university departments. Therefore, even these sorts of grants have an effect on our media. Neither these nor grants funding the printing of books or establishment of websites counted in the total, though they too are forms of media. In comparison to other tech billionaires, Gates has kept his profile as a media controller relatively low. Despite flying more under the radar, Gates and his companies have amassed considerable influence in media. We already rely on Microsoft-owned products for communication, e.g. Skype, Hotmail, social media, LinkedIn, and entertainment, Microsoft Xbox. Furthermore, the hardware and software we use to communicate often comes courtesy of Gates. Not only that, Microsoft owns stakes in media giants such as Comcast and AT&T, and the MS in MSNBC stands for Microsoft. That the Gates Foundation is underwriting a significant chunk of our media ecosystem leads to serious problems with objectivity. The Foundation's grants to media organisations raise obvious conflicts of interest questions. How can reporting be unbiased when a major player holds the purse strings, wrote Gates' local Seattle Times in 2011. This was before the newspaper accepted BMGF money to fund its education lab. In fact, those purse strings we were on about, they don't matter that much. Who cares about purse strings? They just lead down to the purse. We can still ask the purse string holder whether or not we can open the purse. Can we open the purse, Bill? What are you going to say? That Bill Gates is a great guy. Open away at those purse strings. Thank you. Schwab's research has found that this conflict of interest goes right to the very top. Two New York Times columnists have been writing glowingly about the Gates Foundation for years. Without disclosing, they also work for a group, the Solutions Journalism Network, that has received over $7 million from the tech billionaire's charity. The main news again. Bill Gates. What a great guy. That glint in his eye. Those lovely jumpers and sweaters that he wears. And his relationship with Melissa. And who doesn't like Windows? And his great work in the world of health all of a sudden out of nowhere. And his interest in agriculture. Bill Gates, everyone. I've written a little song, in fact, about Bill Gates is great. Oh, Bill Gates. Sorry, is this all strictly necessary? Yes, it is, if I want a new boat. Earlier this year, Schwab also declined to co-report on a story about Kovacs for the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, suspecting that the money Gates had been pumping into the outlet would make it impossible to accurately report on a subject so close to Gates's heart. Sure enough, when the article was published, it repeated the assertion that Gates had little to do with Kovacs's failure, mirroring the BMGF's stance and quoting them throughout. Only at the very end of the more than 5,000-word story did it reveal that the organisation it was defending was paying the wages of its staff. There's nothing wrong with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or Kovacs. It's all fantastic. Oh, and God, I can't believe I almost didn't mention it. One other little thing they did was they paid for me to do this right now. So let's hear it, guys. I don't believe Gates told the Bureau of Investigative Journalism what to write. I think the Bureau implicitly, if subconsciously, knew that to find a way to tell this story that didn't target their funder. Yeah, because if someone's paying you to write something and the story you end up with is derisory, detrimental, and even sarcastic. Hey, did you spend that money we gave you to write that article? Oh, yeah, we did. What did you write? Well, we wrote that you've got too much interest in all these various investigative journalism outlets and that you're funding journalists and you're paying for these scientific papers. Give me that back! The biasing effects of financial conflicts are complex but very real and reliable, Schwab said, describing it as a case study for the perils of Gates-funded journalism. Unfortunately, many of these real criticisms of Gates and his networks are obscured by wild and untrue conspiracy theories about such things as inserting microchips in vaccines to control the population. This has meant that genuine critiques of the Microsoft co-founder are often demonetized. It's not necessary to engage in speculation about conspiracies. It's unhelpful and it doesn't advance the cause of freedom of information, freedom of communication, having objective discussions about complex issues. And when you have the information of someone like Tim Schwab, who's investigated and demonstrated not financial impropriety, it's clearly not that, it's not illegal, but the assertion of influence that likely comes along with such significant investment, you can see already that that is reasonable and legitimate. And as is written by this writer, if you engage in the stuff that's speculative and potentially unfounded and untrue, then you don't get taken seriously about the stuff that should be taken seriously. This should be taken seriously. Or if you listen to what Vandana Shiva talks about with Indian agriculture and its relationship with Microsoft and with Bill Gates, that stuff is empirically proven. It's demonstrable. Like Edward Snowden said on Under the Skin, our podcast, the worst conspiracies are happening in plain sight. The fact that you can see these things clearly unfolding, the stories we tell you every day, already being reported by legit investigative journalists, there's enough there to seriously query the nature of the systems under which we live. This has meant that genuine critiques of the Microsoft co-founder are often demonetized and algorithmically suppressed, but we've not said any of those things. We've been very, very careful about what we've said, and we're certainly not allying ourselves to any conspiracy theory or any unempirical, non-evidenced research stuff. YouTube, just for clarity, meaning that outlets are strongly dissuaded from covering the topic. The paucity of scrutiny of the world's fourth richest individual, in turn, feeds into outlandish suspicions. Gates certainly deserves it. Quite apart from his attempts to radically change African society and his investment in controversial chemical giant Monsanto, he is perhaps the key driver behind the American charter school movement, an attempt to essentially privatize the US education system. Charter schools are deeply unpopular with teachers' unions, which see the movement as an attempt to lessen their autonomy and reduce public oversight into how and what children are taught. Wow, controlling the children's minds now. Amazing. In most coverage, Gates' donations are broadly presented as altruistic gestures. Yet many have pointed to the inherent flaws with this model, noting that allowing billionaires to decide what they do with their money allows them to set the public agenda, giving them enormous power over society. Philanthropy can and is being used deliberately to divert attention away from different forms of economic exploitation that underpin global inequality today, said Lindsay McGoey, Professor of Sociology at the University of Essex, where I'm from. None of this means that the organisation receiving Gates money, media or otherwise, are irredeemably corrupt, nor that the Gates Foundation does not do any good work in the world. We read that. But it does introduce a glaring conflict of interest whereby the very institutions we rely on to hold accountable one of the richest and most powerful men in the planet's history are quietly being funded by him. This conflict of interest is one that the corporate media have largely tried to ignore, while the supposedly altruistic philanthropist Gates just keeps getting richer and laughing all the way to the bank. He might not actually laugh on the way to the bank, and he probably actually doesn't bother going himself. He'll probably have his own bank in his house with people working in it whose education he paid for. Is it right that Bill Gates has that amount of influence, that amount of control? Is that something you want? Do you think it benefits you and the planet at large to have that much influence exerted by one individual through one foundation? I don't know. You let me know what you think in the comments below. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, pass it around, share it around with other people. Click that notification bell on so I can ding you right in the mind every time a thought comes into my head. And if you enjoyed this video, why don't you look at this cheeky, saucy little thing and subscribe also to my Awakening side channel, where I talk much more about spirituality, personal awakening and coping with the reality we find ourselves in now. Please subscribe too to my mailing list so I can communicate directly with you and tell you about stuff like my live tour in the UK from January to May next year. Please stay free.